Like Clarissa said, today I'm going to be talking about building your Copilot muscle. There are some practical examples and a live demo, so hopefully the demo gods are shining. The QR code on screen will take you to all of my social links, and you can find the podcast and everything else there. If I move on before you get a chance to snip it, there will be an opportunity again at the end. Like Clarissa said, I'm a Copilot MVP and a regional director, and I lead the global consult business for digital workplace at Kyndryl. So building an AI native workplace is a key part of what I do. And I've worked in the Copilot space for 2.5 years now, I think. So lots of experience. Now, what we'll talk about today, we'll start with just a very quick intro that covers the things that exist in the Copilot ecosystem. I know that Microsoft have added the word Copilot to what feels like 1 million products. So just a quick view of the types of products, the licensing, that kind of thing. And then we'll get into the good stuff where we start to actually look at building your Copilot muscle and what that actually means. And then I've got some practical prompting tips, a live demo, and then we'll finish just with a view of how you can use that Copilot muscle to really drive business value. So first of all, then, a Copilot and agent overview. Like I said, there are tons of products that Microsoft have released. There are Copilot, Copilot is in every product. There are Copilot products that are more customer facing with things like the Dynamics integrations. Obviously, Copilot is in all of the modern work technology, so the Office apps, it's in the operating system, it's in Power Platform, it's in Viva. There is Copilot in Fabric. There are specialist Copilots or role-based Copilots like the Copilot for finance or sales or service. And the different Copilot that you will need to build the Copilot muscle for, or that you need to drive within a part of the business, is going to be different depending on the role that someone has. So for people who work primarily in a dev role, they might use a little bit of Copilot in Microsoft 365, but GitHub Copilot is probably where they're going to spend much of their time, for example. And then people who work in a sales-oriented role may use the Copilot in Dynamics more extensively. So one of the things that's important is to think about the role that people do, the function that they operate in, because the habits and the behavior change that people need to build are quite often different depending upon where they sit in an organization. And the strategies that you use to build that Copilot muscle across an organization, again, will be different depending on which part of the Copilot ecosystem we're looking at. So for things like the general enterprise Copilot, the one that's included for free, that would be applicable to everybody. So the strategy that you use to get people to start building their Copilot muscle with that is going to be very different to that you might use to bring together a marketing function, for example, and help them understand how they can build a Copilot muscle that's very specific to the things that they might do in marketing or sales or finance. And obviously there are the out-of-the-box Copilots, but when it comes to Copilot plus agents, Microsoft have also released, as you heard Vesta say on the previous session, they've also released many different ways that you can build agents, with everything from Copilot Studio Lite, which was Agent Builder and has been rebranded recently, the low-code version with Copilot Studio, up to things like Azure AI Foundry and the Microsoft 365 AI Toolkit for those pro-code agent building scenarios. And again, part of understanding which is the part of knowing which is the right tool to use is reliant on understanding the context and the scenario and the specific use case. And then if we look at Copilot licensing, so again, this is something that I know has caused a huge amount of confusion over the last couple of years, with as well as lots of renames and shuffling of kind of the products and where they sit. There has also been changes to the pricing and licensing as well. So the other thing that confuses this is that we've also got both consumer and enterprise versions, and they have the same name as well. And what that means is that me as an individual, I can use Copilot, the consumer version, which is essentially more like a ChatGPT compete. So I can use this in my personal life with a personal Microsoft account for free. Or if I have a personal M365 license or a family plan, I can add on a personal Copilot Pro license, which gives me some of what Copilot in an office context can do, but not everything. And then in an office, again, there's a free version, which is the Microsoft Copilot. And that's the enterprise Copilot that comes with all of the enterprise data protection. So it's ring fencing your corporate data and making sure that people can't access that. Then we've got the standard M365 Copilot SKU. So the standard $30 per user per month. And one of the changes that was made recently, which I think is quite interesting, is the role-based Copilots. So sales, service, and finance have all now been included in that premium M365 Copilot license. And previously, this required an add-on. I think it was an additional $20 per user per month. And to me, this is really interesting because what Microsoft are doing is essentially bundling more value into that core license and making it easier for people to be able to leverage that that's specific to their role. And then we've got Copilot capability showing up in places like Power Platform and Viva. In Viva, there is no charge for Copilot, but there is a dependency on having that full Viva Suite license. And then Power Platform licensing, I'm not going anywhere near. It is included in the Power Platform licensing, but there is varied pricing for things like the connectors and capacity and things like that. So again, that depends very much on the use case. Now, if we move on to building your Copilot muscle, one of the things that I think is really interesting is when you look at GitHub Copilot, one of the reasons why this is so successful, apart from the fact that it had probably a 2-year head start in terms of implementing these AI capabilities, but one of the reasons why it's so successful is that it integrates these Copilot capabilities naturally into the developer workflow. So it's easier for them to adopt it in the context of the activities that they're trying to do. And when we look at Microsoft 365 Copilot, it shows up in so many different places, and there are so many different ways to use it that individuals need to find the way that they can use it to add value. And it's one of the things that makes it both really interesting from a potential value perspective, but also a little bit more challenging in terms of adoption. And one of the things that I think is really important, one of the things we all need to remember and recognize is that people have a choice whether to use Copilot. I've seen organizations who, they might allocate licenses on an as requested basis, and they don't really have a formal adoption strategy. Or they might just give licenses to people and they don't have a formal adoption strategy. And then they complain that they're not getting that return on investment. And when you think that cost of M365 Copilot sits on top of the standard licensing, it's quite a significant cost, particularly for bigger organizations. So people don't have to use it. It's discretionary. They can choose whether to use it or not. And if they don't find the value, or if they don't start to build that muscle memory, they just won't use it. And it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, because we all, as individuals, we all have very different ways of working. And when I first started talking to customers and colleagues about Copilot more than 2 years ago, there was this big obsession with use cases, which I think came out of the conversations that organizations were having around where they could apply Azure OpenAI service, for example. So they were looking for use cases in their business where they could apply AI. And when we started talking about Copilot, what that meant was that they'd come to me and they'd say, okay, what are the top 5 use cases for finance? And people became kind of obsessed with finding, these kind of 2, 3, 5 top examples for a specific role, instead of realizing that you might have 10 people in finance who all have the same job description. They all have the same tasks that they need to do on a daily basis. But the way that they do that is very different. And the reason for that is that we have all, as individuals, developed productivity habits, probably since we started working. For some people before that, if they were using tech through their high school, secondary school, university. So the way that I manage my emails and my tasks, the way that I create, collaborate, communicate will be different to how someone else does that. And if you're too prescriptive with saying these are the 5 ways that you will use Copilot, they might not actually be relevant for those people, because the way that they run their workday might be very different to mine. So it's really important that we recognize that people have different ways of working and people also have different ways of learning as well. So different people are going to require different approaches to change enablement. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is to help people build and train their Copilot muscle. And if I use me as the example again, my productivity habits I've been building for more than 20 years. So what that means is that for me to integrate Copilot into my workday, I've essentially had to relearn new productivity habits. And when you've built habits over such a long period of time, it's really difficult to do that. I'm sure many of you, you've started training for, I don't know, a 5K, 10K marathon, or you've started a gym program or something like that. It's really hard work to build new habits. And essentially that is what we're wanting people to do. And in the same way that you can't train for a marathon by watching other people run, you are not able to build your Copilot muscle without putting in the practical hands-on work. And that does start a little bit with that initial, here's how you use Copilot and here's some examples. But what we need people to do is to build their Copilot muscle in a way that's really personal to them and a way that complements their ways of working. So like I said, rewiring personal productivity habits is super hard. So what this means is that, as individuals, we need to start with understanding how to use the tech. So in this case, Copilot, we need to understand how to start using Copilot. We need to know where it shows up. We need to know what types of prompts we can use. We need to know, which apps, what kind of behavior differences there might be across the different apps, and all those kinds of things. And then what we want to do is to find some of the quick wins where Copilot is able to boost your productivity. So, it might be, and the most common place that people start is with using it in Teams meetings, for example, because it's a use case that makes sense for people. It gives instant value. It reduces the mental load of being in that meeting. And it could be helping prioritize emails. Some of these really common use cases, that's kind of where we want people to start. But we want them to go beyond that. We want them to start building those really unique prompts and scenarios that are very specific to them and their habits and the job that they need to do. And that point about building new habits is super important because it takes time to do that. And as part of this, mindset is incredibly important as well, because building new habits takes time. In the same way that you can't train for a marathon by watching someone else run. You can't train for a marathon in a day or a week. Building these habits takes time. But one of the things that I think is really powerful with Copilot is the fact that you can start to build these habits. And then as the broader capabilities across agentic and AI mature and we start to see more complex solutions and those become plugged into Copilot as that UI for AI, people have already started to build these habits that will help them adopt some of these other changes more easily. And part of the mindset has to be being curious and being able to experiment, because the Copilot technology, regardless of which product you're in, the Copilot technology is evolving so quickly that something that you try today might not work, but if you try it in a month, it might work. So we need people to build the habits, and we also need them to, be willing to continuously try new things as well. And one of the ways that this is most successful is when there's a community, where, whether that's within a team or a function or across an organization, or even communities like our tech community where people are sharing at conferences and events. But being able to share the experiences with other people and learn and improve together and find things that have value, and all of these things will continue to help both the individual build their Copilot muscle, but also for that to be developed across the organization as well. And the people that I see have the most success with this are those who practice daily. And it could be as simple as putting a reminder in for the start of your workday, encouraging you to use Copilot to plan your day and figure out what you need to do. But those who start to practice daily are the ones who are able to build that muscle, not just in one Copilot app, but across all of the places where it shows up. And there's a lady that I used to work with who I always use as the best example of this, because she posted on LinkedIn to say that, she was saving more than an hour a day, which was just phenomenal, or freeing up more than an hour a day. So I messaged her and asked if we could have a call, because I wanted to understand what it was that she was doing. And she just gave me this huge list of all of the different ways that she was using Copilot. She was using it to help her prioritize the meetings and the workload of her team. She was in a sales enablement role. So when she received new pitch decks from different parts of the business, she was using Copilot to help synthesize those so that she was able to create packs that she could distribute to sellers. And she was also using it to help her create training material and training sessions as well. But she just had, it wasn't just one use case, it was a whole list of different ways that she was using it. And she was just a perfect example of someone who has built that muscle memory across many of her productivity habits. Now, so individuals, we have to put the work in to build our own Copilot muscle. But for this to be successful in organizations, leaders have a key role to play as well. Microsoft, if you don't read the Work Lab site, I'd highly recommend that you spend some time looking at the research that they publish there. They have some really good content. And there was a Work Lab research report that was released a little while back that focused on the impact that leaders can have in an organization. And I spoke to the CEO of the organization I worked in at the time about this. And she was really frustrated with me because she said, people always say leaders need to lean in or lead by example. But quite often they don't know what that looks like. So I think it's incredibly important for organizations to have business leaders who are able to do that. But equally, they need help to be able to do that. And when you think about very senior leaders like C-suite or very, very senior execs, and when we think about personal productivity habits, these are people who are typically at the top of their game. They've been working for decades. They have those productivity habits fully entrenched. They have incredibly high demands on their time. They have high workloads. So they don't really have the time to play and experiment in the way that standard employees might be able to. And many of the ways that Copilot showed value in the early days, with things like report summarization and that kind of thing, they have staff to do that for them. So one of the things that's really interesting when helping leaders lead by example is making sure that they actually understand the different ways that it can work and trying to find value really specific to their jobs as well. And then alongside the actual Copilot side of it, it's really important that for Copilot to be successful, there is a clear strategy and objectives. So within the organization, people need to understand why the organization is using it and what they're trying to achieve by using it. And leaders need to create space as well for that experimentation. If people are already overworked and suffering from burnout, for example, they are going to struggle with finding the time to be able to experiment and change their productivity habits. And we see some people who are reluctant to use it because they're worried that if they start to use it and the team becomes much more efficient, their job might be at risk. And this is a real and valid concern. And leaders need to make sure that they are communicating why it's being rolled out in a way that is positive and inspiring for the organization. And then from a leadership perspective, being able to track and measure the results and the impact. Like I said earlier, this is an expensive license. So from an org perspective, it's important to be able to quantify the benefits and the value and the return on investment, and share the success stories as well. Create space within the organization to spotlight the champions, to spotlight the people who are using it in new and innovative ways, and really just creating that positive culture. Because Copilot becomes that kind of front door, that first step into full AI adoption. And it's incredibly important from a leadership perspective to position it in that way. And then as part of that, obviously, for those of you who have worked in the SharePoint space for some time, you'll be familiar with the concept of champions. But for Copilot, it becomes incredibly important because they will become like the personal trainers in the organization, the ones who are helping people in their part of the business avoid bad form, helping them get stronger, faster. And from a leadership perspective, the remit that they should give the champions is to focus on building this fitter and stronger organization. And coming back to the point I made earlier about people needing to experiment and try things again and again, champions can help guide people through that process. They can help them with things like habit stacking and helping them understand how to use Copilot across different applications and different services. When people start to plateau, in the same way that a personal trainer can change things up in a gym, a champion can help guide people through the tech adoption plateaus that they might hit and continue to build that muscle in new and different ways. And when you think about personal trainers in the gym, they use metrics like weights lifted, reps, speed, distance, those kinds of things. The champions in an organization will be able to use things like the usage reports, Copilot analytics, data from the Copilot dashboards, and help individuals progress against the company goals that have been set for Copilot. They are the ones who are going to teach technique around things like prompting. They'll help people build routines. They will spot the bad form or the things that people shouldn't be doing with Copilot, and just generally keep this Copilot muscle building moving forward and make sure that transformation really sticks. So when you as an individual are building your Copilot muscle, again, if we think about this in the context of training for a marathon or going to the gym, it's really important to start small. If you do go to the gym and start a new weightlifting program, you're not going to deadlift 100 kilos on your first day. If you do, I'd be very impressed, but you'd be more likely to get an injury. So start with light reps or simple prompts, iterate, build over time as you become more confident, as you start to understand how to build a strong prompt, how to add the right context in. And if you want better results, then like you would in the gym, add more weight, or in this case, start to add more of that context. Make sure you cross-train across the different Copilots for the different strengths. Understand which part of the ecosystem you need to show up in, depending upon the goal that you're trying to achieve. And in the same way that going to the gym and just doing a random workout every day or every week is not really going to give you proper results, the same thing goes for Copilot adoption as well. So think about the champion enablement. Think about putting in place structured, teams-based guidance approach. Look at tracking, look at usage metrics, talk to people and surface the ways that they're using it and try to quantify the value. And on the topic of value, it's incredibly important to say ROI for Copilot is not minutes saved. Because again, this is an expensive license, and for a CFO, if they're given a huge bill for deploying Copilot and they're told it's okay because people have saved 30 minutes, that is not going to that's not a stat that they can use on their balance sheet. Ultimately, they've got a big cost and they can't tie it directly to either bottom line efficiencies, top line revenue growth, top line sales growth, anything like that. So use this program as a way to start to capture some of those things in a way that actually will quantify the value. And this is the most important point. You wouldn't just give someone access to a gym and expect them to transform. And the same goes for Copilot. For people who are just given Copilot and left to their own devices, they might find some small ways that they can use it which are personally beneficial, but from an ROI perspective, they won't get to where they need to be and they won't do the work to build that full Copilot muscle. So it's really important to actually have a plan for how to drive this in an organization, for how to drive both the individual and the org level behavior change that we need, and how to unlock that business value. Okay, so prompting tips, or why context matters. And this is true for both. This is true for Copilot. It is true for other AI solutions. Anywhere that you need to write a prompt, it's incredibly important that you have the right ingredients. So that includes the goal. What response is it that you need? And then the context is why you need it or what you're trying to achieve with this. The source data, what info do you want Copilot to use? Because if you just ask Copilot a generic question, it will basically look across your individual semantic index and it will try to bring back the thing it thinks is relevant. But if you tell it where you want to look, it will give you a much better result at the end of it. And then expectations are, how do you want Copilot to meet your needs? And if we look at this in terms of an actual example, so this is an example prompt, and the thing we're asking Copilot to do is to generate 3 to 5 bullet points. The context in this is we want these bullet points to prepare me for a meeting with a client to discuss their new brand campaign. So that's telling Copilot why we need it, what the thing that we need it for, and who is involved. From a source perspective, we're telling it to focus on email and Teams chats since June. So we're being specific in terms of the target content we want it to look at. And then in terms of expectations, we're asking it to use simple language so that I can get up to speed quickly. This is a really good format for a prompt, and we're going to go to a live demo now So please pray with me that the demo gods are going to be nice, but we'll show this in a little bit more detail. So okay, so I'm in Copilot, and I am going to give it a simple prompt. So I'm going to ask it to write a message about our new onboarding automation tool that we just launched. And if we think about this in terms of goal, context, source, and expectations, I haven't really given it any of those. I've basically just asked it to do something with no context, no source material. You can see it's actually found in my personal tenant. It's actually found the two conferences that I've talked about this. But it's basically just made it up. It's got nothing that it's really looking at that has anything relevant in. So it's just given it its best shot. Okay, so if I clear that, and let's try something a little bit more intermediate. So we're still on the same topic of the onboarding automation tool, but I've got a little bit more detail now. So I'm asking it to write a Teams message, which is the goal. I'm asking it to let the HR team know we've launched the new tool, which is the context. I am asking it to keep it informal and helpful, which is the expectations. And I've called out a couple of other things that I want it to highlight as well. So again, you'll notice though that there's no source content in this. So, it's given me, you can see it's followed my instructions. It's got something that's a little bit more informal because it's a Teams message. Because it didn't have any source material, essentially, it's just included the additional guidance that I've given it. And then if I go to something that's a little bit more advanced, and you'll have to bear with me because I don't have the PDF file that I'm actually referring to here. But so this is a more advanced prompt where I'm asking it to draft an email, max 150 words. So that's the goal. And the email address is to the HR team, again, announcing the launch of the new tool. And then I'm giving it more guidance in terms of the expectations. I'm asking it to use a specific tone. I am asking it to include a one-line hook, 3 short bullet points, and to end with a clear call to action. And then I'm asking it to reference an attached user guide as well. So you'll just have to imagine that there is an attached user guide because that's not in this tenant. But you'll see as that loads, it's giving me a much better response than that original one, which just had that single line. It's asking me as well if I wanted it to be formatted in Outlook or if I want to send it to a specific group. But you can instantly see how, as we move through prompts with more detail, with more context, with more guidance in terms of what we're expecting, we are instantly starting to get better results. And this is something that you can do across the different apps as well. So if I just bring this back up, I won't demo these because I'm just conscious of time, but you could use variations of this prompt in the different Office apps that can take action specifically in those apps that are aligned with the thing that you're trying to achieve. So, in this example, we've got this briefing document for the new automation tool. And in Word, I could ask it to turn this outline into more of an exec summary, explaining the tool's impact using plain English. In Excel, I could give it the data and ask it to summarize trends that are going to convince leadership that this tool saves time. And again, I can give it instructions on the way that I want that response back. I could ask PowerPoint to generate slides. I could use Power Automate Copilot to help me create a really simple workflow that will let managers know when new people are starting to onboard into this process. And I could even use Copilot Chat to search the web for examples from other companies about the return on investment of onboarding automation in mid-sized companies. So, hang on, sorry, get rid of that. So you can start to see how adding additional structure to your prompts, adding additional context will give you better results, and how you can adapt that across the different apps. Now, the next demo that we're going to look at is Copilot Notebooks, which is something that is incredibly powerful, and I'm really looking forward to see how this evolves. And what Copilot Notebooks essentially allows you to do is to bring together different types of content into one place, and these different types of content could live across the tenant. They could be pages that sit in your OneDrive, or pages that you have access to that sit in a workspace that you share with someone else. It could be files that sit in your OneDrive or sitting in SharePoint or Teams. And you can bring all of these together and then essentially create like a grounded content set that you can use, and you can ask Copilot specific prompts about that content. And if you go to Notebooks and click Create Notebook, what it will ask you to do is basically select the files that you want to include. So let me just select a few. So I've just picked some of my PowerPoint slides that are in OneDrive, but you could pick different types of content and content that's across different places. You get a little filter that will show you you'll be able to filter between the different types of stuff that you have added. You can add Copilot instructions to this as well. So if you want to give it specific additional instructions in terms of how you want it to answer, you can do that. So I'm going to ask it to respond like a pirate. You can get an audio overview. What that will do is basically analyze all of the content that you've included in this notebook and create almost like a pseudo podcast. So you can listen to a summary of all the content. So if you have a content pack, if you have like a set of files or a new site or something like that you've got access to, you could use this as a really quick way to help you get up to speed with that. And you can ask Copilot questions, like I said, on this content. So we'll just give that to a moment to respond. I did ask it to respond like a pirate as well, so I will be interested to see how this comes back to us. And obviously this is quite a fun example of how you can use the system instructions, but you can actually make these much more useful in a work context. So you could give it additional instructions about the target, the intended audience, or the people who, if you're using this to generate information or insights, you could say this is for an exec audience, or this is for a customer audience, or something like that. You can give it style guides around the tone that you want it to use, whether you want it to be informal or formal, concise. I like the fact that that's added. System instructions is something I've used extensively in ChatGPT for a while. I'm just going to give this a little bit of time to run, and we will jump over here. You can see this is one I did earlier in the year. I'm not going to play let me just mute the tab. I don't want it to actually start playing the audio, but you can see down here, it has started playing the audio, even though you can't hear it. You can change the speed, you can skip, fast forward, you can save. You can delete the audio overview. So if you create this overview and then you add more content in that's not included in that initial audio overview, you could delete that and regenerate it. So it's fairly early days for notebooks. Essie, I can see a question in the chat around the limitation with up to 20 references. I'm not actually sure what the timeline is for that to be updated, but I think as they start to increase the limit or the amount of files or sources you're able to use, this will continue to become much more useful. The other thing that I've seen people reporting, you can access this in the Copilot app on mobile, but you can only access on mobile existing notebooks. So you can't create new notebooks on the mobile app. I don't think you can add content and things like that. But if you have an existing notebook, you can go in, you can ask it questions, you can listen to the audio overview on mobile. So as well as the limitations in terms of references, there are additional limitations to be aware of for mobile use as well. And so that bombed out. I will make these slides available afterwards as well, and it will have all of the demo instructions in them. So if you want to go and have a run through this yourself, you'll be able to follow those instructions. The next one that I wanted to show was researcher agents. One of the things that Microsoft are doing, which I think is incredibly valuable, is releasing a lot of first-party agents to users of M365 Copilot. Things like the facilitator agent in Teams meetings, or the interpreter agent, the knowledge agent that Bessa mentioned on the prior session, SharePoint agents, and researcher and analyst were two of the first frontier agents that they released. And researcher agent uses 3.0 Mini, which is a deep thinking model. I've had people complain to me that they've tried to use researcher agent, but that it is quite slow. And that's just something to be aware of. It's not slow because it's not working. It is slow by design because of the way that it is analysing the content that you give it and processing that. I'm not going to run this because I am conscious of time, but I will show you one that I've done previously. So this is the demo that's in the slides as well. So I found a number of AI white papers and research papers online, and then I basically gave them to researcher. Sorry, let me just find one that did work. I gave them to researcher and basically asked it to give me a summary and synthesis of the research papers, and to pull out any key insights that warrant deeper investigation. And then it comes back to you after that initial question. It comes back to you and says, here are some clarifying questions. I want you to give me a little bit more information about what you're trying to achieve. And then it goes off and looks at the content you've given it, and it starts to tell you what it's doing. I do have a version that has worked of this, but essentially what it comes back to you with is very detailed thinking. And Jeff Teeper actually, he was on the Copilot fireside chat with Kevin McDonnell and I earlier this year, and he said that he uses this extensively to as a way to process a huge amount of white papers, research papers, content from Microsoft partners. So this is a really valuable way of helping you synthesize and understand significant amounts of content quickly and being able to pull out really valuable insights. I'm also aware that people have used this to do things like help prepare promotion cases or performance reviews, where they've kind of asked researcher agent, like, here's the job I want to go for, and this is kind of what I'm doing now, and these are all the things I've achieved, and given it all of that source data. and it's actually helped them build a really compelling promotion case. So there are some really interesting things you could do with this. I would highly recommend playing around with that. And I did have one last demo, which I'm not going to do because I know that we need to start wrapping up quickly. But the last demo I was going to show you was creating an agent using a prompt in Copilot Studio Lite, previously known as Agent Builder. Again, it's super easy to do. If you've not tried it, I would highly recommend you have a go at it. And the instructions for that will be in the slides. So then when we look at driving business value and making sure that people start to get the ROI, one of the things that's really important to recognise is that Copilot continues to evolve really quickly. Like I said, new features coming continuously, Microsoft continuing to add additional value into the premium license. And if you started to build your Copilot muscle, I think that's fantastic. If you haven't started yet, you are a little bit behind, but it's not too late at all, because we are so early in the AI evolution. We're only 2 years into this. The tech, particularly on the agent side, the tech is still continuing to evolve. And putting that work in now to build your Copilot muscle will really set you up for the future as this becomes much more prevalent in the working environments. So focusing on things like AI literacy, prompting, starting to build those habits. And one of the things that's really interesting is that as people start to build some of these more basic capabilities, they start to identify the opportunities where they could drive additional value if Copilot was connected into a system, or if it did X, Y, Z thing. And what that starts to do is increase the complexity of the scenarios that Copilot and agents are being used for. And one of the things, I hate this phrase, it was in one of the Work Lab reports, one of the things Microsoft has said is that as agents continue to mature and become part of the workforce, each of us will need to learn how to be an agent boss. And what that means is that we will need to develop the skills needed to be a manager of agents, to be able to guide them, to be able to govern them. So starting, even though some of the technology is fairly early, starting now to understand how agents could change the way that you work will help position you for this. And then at an org level, when we think about driving AI, driving Copilot, adoption for Copilot, like I said earlier, is not like any other product. It's not a case of saying, here's how you use it, off you go. We really need people to build the Copilot muscle, and that requires focusing on change enablement, helping people build the habits. We need to have an approach that looks at the different ways that people learn, and making sure that we're helping people build the skills across all different types of learners, all different types of roles. And for this to be really successful, it needs that leadership buy-in. So Copilot is a tool that will augment. It should be designed to augment humans, not to replace humans. And we want leaders to position this correctly. We want them to own the strategy. We want them to lead by example and create the space within an organization for Copilot to flourish. And when I look at the key differentiators for organizations who have been successful with Copilot, they need to have M365 Copilot, and ideally they need to have that needs to be a robust deployment, a strong digital core, if you like, with a level of data governance. Doesn't have to be perfect, but there needs to be at least some data governance. There needs to be a level of existing M365 adoption, and ideally when we look at agent building, there needs to be a centre of excellence or centre of enablement in place. For those organisations that have been most successful, it's important to have the right culture and mindset, and that's both at an individual level and an org level. There needs to be this culture of innovation. There needs to be people need to recognise that they need to change their mindsets, their habits, and their behaviours. And then from a strategy perspective, there needs to actually be a defined and understood strategy for Copilot. And ideally, that should be part of a broader AI strategy. But if not, at least on its own, there should be clear objectives, a clear vision for the use of Copilot. with leadership buy-in, with business sponsorship. And organisations that don't have that in place will move more slowly through the adoption curve. They will struggle to see the potential ROI. And then thinking about that Copilot muscle, it's really important that we don't forget the accessory work. In the same way that you improve your squats and deadlifts by focusing on balance and core strength and things like that, as people build their Copilot muscle and as we all become managers of agents, it's really important that we as individuals and within an organisation, we're helping people understand how to delegate so that they know when an agent can help, when Copilot can help. It's important that we are building critical thinking skills. It's important that each of us understands responsible AI, what that means and the role that we have to play. We need people to understand workflow thinking. We need them to be able to understand, when there's an opportunity to do things differently by applying technology in a different way. And then that general digital literacy and tool knowledge. So helping people know what to use when. It's always been a challenge in the Microsoft 365 world. And now we've added this Copilot ecosystem on top, and we've got a whole other battle to face as well. So thank you. With that, I will wrap up. I know I'm very slightly over there, but if people do have questions, pop them in the chat, or if there is time, feel free to come off mute. Please do rate the session, and the QR code in the bottom right of the screen is for all of my socials and podcast and all of that. I'd love it if you connect with me.